The chapel smelled of cold stone and dying lilies, and the man waiting at the altar was not expecting her. Sable knew this because when she stepped through the arched doorway, veil pulled low over her face. His entire body went rigid. Not the subtle stiffening of a groom bracing himself for the weight of commitment. This was the sharp, predatory stillness of a man who had spotted something wrong and was calculating exactly how wrong it was. She kept walking, one foot in front of the other, the borrowed wedding dress dragging behind her like a surrender flag. The silk was too long because it had been made for Odette, who was 4 inches taller and 20 times more willing to be here. The bodice gaped at the shoulders because Odette had the frame of a swan, and Sable had the frame of a woman who carried firewood and kneaded bread dough every morning before dawn. 30 steps to the altar. She counted them because counting kept her breathing steady, and breathing steady kept the tears locked behind her eyes where they belonged. The chapel was nearly empty. That was the first thing that had struck her when the carriage door opened an hour ago. A duke's wedding should have filled every pew, should have drawn half the county at minimum. Instead, she counted 11 people scattered across the cold wooden benches like afterthoughts. An elderly clergyman who kept clearing his throat. A solicitor with ink-stained fingers clutching documents. A handful of servants in dark uniforms who watched her approach with expressions that hovered somewhere between pity and grim resignation. No flowers along the aisle. No music. No family. Just the man at the altar, standing beneath a window of gray light, watching her come closer with eyes she could not yet read. 20 steps. She thought of Odette's face that morning, perfect and tearless, and utterly resolved. "I will not marry a man the world has forgotten," Odette had said, pulling pins from her wedding hair. "They say he has not left that estate in 3 years. I will not chain myself to a ghost just because father promised me to one." "But the contract," Sable had stammered. "If no bride arrives, he forfeits everything. The house, the land, mother's pension." "Then you go," Odette had said. "You are father's daughter, too. Wear the veil. Sign the name. He has never seen either of us. What happens after that is your problem, not mine." Sable had stood in her stepsister's bedroom, holding a wedding dress that smelled of Odette's perfume, jasmine and bergamot, and the sharp undercut of ambition, and understood with perfect clarity that she had no choice. Not really. Not when her father's hands shook every evening from the illness he tried to hide. Not when her mother's pension was the only thing keeping them from the workhouse. Not when Odette was already packing a valise for the morning coach to Edinburgh, where a widowed viscount with a fortune and a fondness for beautiful blondes was waiting with considerably more enthusiasm than the forgotten duke. So Sable had put on the dress, pinned the veil, climbed into the carriage that had been sent for a bride whose name she would have to answer to for the rest of her life. 10 steps, and she was close enough now to see him properly through the gauze of the veil. He was tall and lean in a way that suggested deprivation rather than elegance, as if his body had been whittled down to its essential structure by something more punishing than fashion. Dark hair, longer than was fashionable, pushed back from a face that caught her breath and held it. He was not what she had expected. Odette's contemptuous description, half mad, a ghost, a man the world forgot, had painted a portrait of ruin. But this man wasn't ruined. He was contained. Every line of his body held with the deliberate control of someone who had learned that stillness was safer than movement, that silence was safer than speech, that if you held yourself tightly enough, nothing else could touch you. His eyes were the color of rain on slate. Gray, she thought, then corrected herself. Not gray. Something darker, something that shifted when the light moved. He watched her approach without blinking, without smiling, without offering any of the small courtesies a groom might extend to his arriving bride. 5 steps. She stopped, The dress pooled around her feet. Through the veil, the world looked gauzy and unreal, and she clung to that unreality because it was the only thing keeping her upright. The clergyman cleared his throat again. Miss Odette Varenne? The name hit her like a slap. She opened her mouth to confirm it, to seal the lie, to become someone she was not. She hesitated. 1 heartbeat. 2. Long enough for the Duke's eyes to narrow. Long enough for something to shift in his expression. A flicker of attention that had not been there before, as if her hesitation had been louder than any words. Yes, she said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt, pitched low to disguise the tremor beneath it. I am she. The Duke studied her for a moment that stretched like taffy, slow and deliberate, and impossibly tense. Then he turned to the clergyman and nodded once. Proceed. The ceremony was brief and brutal in its efficiency. Vows stripped of poetry, reduced to their legal bones. The clergyman spoke as if reading terms of surrender rather than words of union. I do, she said, and the chapel seemed to hold its breath. The ring was plain gold, too large for her finger. She had to curl her hand into a fist to keep it from sliding off, and the Duke noticed. She saw his gaze drop to her clenched hand, saw the fractional tightening of his jaw, and knew he was cataloging the detail, filing it away. You may kiss the bride, the clergyman said with all the enthusiasm of a man announcing a tax increase. The Duke turned to her. For a terrible, suspended moment, she thought he would lift the veil right there, would see her face, and know immediately that she was not the woman in the portrait his solicitors had sent, was not the tall, blonde beauty his contract promised, was not Odette. Instead, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to the veil itself, a ghost of a kiss against gauze and borrowed silk. His mouth barely grazed the fabric over her cheek, but she felt the warmth of his breath through it, and something in her stomach dropped like a stone into deep water. He pulled back without a word. It is done, the solicitor announced. If your Grace and the new Duchess would sign. She signed Odette's name. The ink gleamed wet on the parchment like a wound that had not yet learned to scar. The carriage was black and unadorned. They sat on opposite benches. The door closed. Silence pressed against the walls. You are not what I expected, he said. Your father's letters described someone taller. The portrait showed fair hair. You may remove the veil. Pretense serves no further purpose. She lifted the veil. The gray light of the carriage window fell across her face, and she watched the Duke's expression as he saw her for the first time. Dark hair where Odette's was golden, brown eyes where Odette's were blue. She waited for the explosion, for the fury, the accusation, the demand to annul everything. His expression did not change. He studied her face as if she were a passage in a difficult book that required careful reading. Then he said, very quietly, I see. 2 words, utterly calm, and somehow more terrifying than any outburst could have been. You knew, Sable whispered. I suspected, he corrected. The hesitation at the altar. The dress that does not fit. The ring that is too large. He tilted his head, and for the first time, something almost human crossed his features. Curiosity, raw and unguarded, like sunlight breaking through heavy cloud. What I don't know is who you actually are. The carriage rattled onward through the gray countryside, carrying a duke and the wrong bride toward a house she had never seen, and Sable realized with dawning horror that the lie she had expected to last at least until morning had survived exactly 14 minutes. Sable's mouth opened and closed twice before words found their way out. My name is Sable Varenne. I am Odette's stepsister. The Duke absorbed this the way stone absorbs rain without visible effect. So she sent you in her place, with no warning, no consultation, no concern for what would happen when the deception was discovered. My father is ill. The marriage contract includes provisions for his care and my mother's pension. If no bride appeared, everything was forfeit. Odette knew I would not let that happen, because you are the kind of person who carries other people's burdens, the Duke said. It was not a question. Because I am the kind of person who has no other choice. The carriage hit a rut in the road, jolting them both. Sable gripped the seat to steady herself, and the too large ring slid down her finger, catching at the knuckle. She pushed it back with her thumb, a gesture she suspected would become habitual. The Duke watched the small adjustment with those still assessing eyes. Your father. What is his illness? A wasting condition. The physicians cannot name it precisely. He grows weaker each month. The pension from your estate was to cover his care. And now you feared I will void the contract and let your family suffer because the wrong daughter showed up at the altar. Sable met his eyes directly. Will you? The question hung between them like smoke. Outside, the landscape had changed. Cultivated fields gave way to wilder ground, rolling moorland dotted with gorse and bracken. The road narrowed. Trees closed in overhead, their branches bare and reaching. The Duke leaned back against the seat, and for the first time, weariness showed in his posture. Not physical exhaustion, but something deeper. The bone-level fatigue of a man who had been carrying weight for so long, he had forgotten what it felt like to stand straight. I married a woman today, he said slowly. I do not particularly care which woman, as long as the contract is fulfilled and the conditions are met. Your father receives his pension. The estate secures the alliance. The world believes I have a wife, which is the only thing my family's solicitors have been demanding since the Ron's death. I entered this marriage because it was the last condition of my father's will. Marry before the age of 30, or the estate passes to a cousin who would sell it for timber and gambling debts. I have 11 days until my birthday. Your stepsister's departure and your arrival have changed nothing of substance. The bleakness of it took her breath away. Not the facts themselves, though those were grim enough, but the utter absence of self-pity in his delivery. He stated his circumstances the way a physician states a diagnosis. Clinical. Complete. Detached from the suffering it described. What happened to your brother? She asked before she could stop herself. The temperature in the carriage dropped. Not literally, but the quality of the air changed, charged with something she recognized. The particular silence of a wound being touched. That, the Duke said, his voice dropping to a register that was almost gentle in its warning, is not a question for today. What is your name? She asked. He looked at her, as if the question surprised him, as if he had forgotten that names were things people exchanged. Cassius, he said. Cassius Blackthorne, Duke of Ashworth. Though no one has called me anything but your grace, or that unfortunate Ashworth business, in quite some time. The carriage crested a hill, and Sable saw Ashworth Hall for the first time. Her breath stopped. Ashworth Hall loomed into view. Built of dark stone that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, the house sprawled across a ridge overlooking a valley choked with mist. One entire wing appeared to be closed off, windows shuttered, ivy crawling unopposed across the facade. The grounds, which must once have been magnificent, showed the distinctive neglect of sustained inattention. Overgrown hedges, a fountain filled with dead leaves, a gravel drive that had surrendered in patches to encroaching grass. It looked like a house in mourning. Home, Cassius said. The word carried no warmth. The carriage pulled up to the entrance, and a woman emerged from the front door before the wheels had fully stopped. She was perhaps 50, broad-shouldered and practical-looking, with steel-colored hair pulled back severely, and the bearing of someone accustomed to managing chaos. Your Grace, she said, opening the carriage door herself rather than waiting for the footman. The house is prepared as you instructed." Then her eyes landed on Sable, and something complicated moved across her weathered features. Surprise, quickly suppressed. Assessment, openly conducted. And beneath both, a cautious, almost reluctant hope. "Mrs. Garrick," Cassius said, "this is the Duchess of Ashworth. Welcome, Your Grace. We have been waiting a long time for you." "Mrs. Garrick will show you to your rooms," Cassius said, already moving toward a corridor that led deeper into the house. "I have matters to attend to." "Cassius," she said. He stopped, turned. The use of his name had caught him off guard. She could see it in the slight widening of his eyes, the momentary crack in his careful control. "Thank you," she said, "for not voiding the contract, for letting my family keep the pension. I know this is not what you bargained for." He studied her for a long moment. "You are correct," he said finally. "It is not what I bargained for." Then he turned and disappeared into the dark corridor, and Sable stood in the entrance hall of her new home, wearing her stepsister's wedding dress, carrying her stepsister's name on a marriage certificate, listening to the silence of a house that felt less like a residence and more like a mausoleum. Mrs. Garrick touched her elbow gently. "Come, Your Grace. Let me show you something." She led Sable not to the grand rooms she expected, but through a side passage and up a narrow staircase to a set of chambers in the east wing. When she opened the door, Sable's breath caught for the second time that day. The rooms were beautiful, not in the imposing, museum-like way of the entrance hall, but genuinely, humanly beautiful. Warm amber walls, a fireplace already lit and crackling, windows that looked out over the only part of the grounds that still appeared tended, a walled garden where late roses clung stubbornly to their stems. The bed was dressed in white linen and soft wool. A writing desk sat near the window, stocked with paper and ink. Bookshelves lined one wall, half filled with volumes that showed signs of actual reading. Cracked spines, turned down corners, the gentle wear of being loved. "These were his mother's rooms," Mrs. Garrick said quietly. "Before she left, he had them prepared for you. Would not let anyone else choose the linens or stock the shelves. Spent 3 days selecting those books himself." Sable turned to stare at her. "He did this himself?" Mrs. Garrick's expression was carefully neutral, but her eyes were not. "He has not entered this wing in 2 years, Your Grace. Preparing these rooms is the most life I have seen in him since Master Theron died." Master Theron, the brother, the unnamed wound. Before Sable could ask more, Mrs. Garrick curtsied and moved toward the door. "Dinner is at 7. His Grace takes it in the small dining room." She hesitated, then added, "He will not expect you to come. He expects nothing from anyone anymore. But the room will be set for 2, just in case." The door closed, and Sable stood alone in rooms that a forgotten duke had prepared with his own hands for a bride he did not know, would never have chosen, and had married only because a dead father's will demanded it. She sat on the edge of the bed. The mattress gave beneath her like a sigh. She was the Duchess of Ashworth. She was Sable Varenne, pretending to be Odette. Varenne married to a man who knew she was neither, living in a house that felt like grief given architecture, surrounded by servants who looked at her with desperate hope because she was the first new thing to enter these walls since Theron died. She looked down at the gold ring hanging loose on her finger and made herself a promise. She would go to dinner. She would sit across from the ghost of Ashworth, and she would make him see that she was real, that she was here, that whatever silence had consumed this place did not have to consume her too. Then she would figure out the rest, one impossible thing at a time. Dinner was excruciating. The small dining room turned out to be a space roughly the size of Sable's entire former house, with a table long enough to seat 14, set with 2 place settings at opposite ends. The distance between them was so vast she would have needed to shout to be heard, which she suspected was precisely the point. Cassius was already seated when she arrived, dressed in the same dark clothes he had worn to the chapel, reading a leather-bound ledger, as if sharing a meal with his new wife was an administrative inconvenience he intended to dispatch as efficiently as possible. Sable stood in the doorway for a moment, taking in the absurd geometry of the arrangement. Then she picked up her place setting, plate, glass, silverware, linen napkin, carried it down the length of the table, and set it down directly across from him. He looked up from his ledger. She sat down. The room held its breath. From somewhere beyond the door, she heard Mrs. Garrick make a small, choked sound that might have been a laugh. "That is not where you were placed," Cassius said. "I could not hear you from the other end, and I don't enjoy shouting over soup." Something flickered in his gray eyes. Surprise, or the memory of what surprise used to feel like. He closed the ledger without marking his page. There is no one else. No steward? He left. 2 years ago, along with most of the senior staff. A pause. They found the situation here untenable. Mrs. Garrick stayed, Sable said. Mrs. Garrick is stubborn to the point of pathology. She has been with this family since before I was born. She would sooner burn the house down than leave it. She seems to care about you a great deal. Cassius set his fork down with careful deliberation. Mrs. Garrick cares about Ashworth, the estate, the legacy, the name. I am merely the current occupant of the title. I do not think that is true. You have been here less than 4 hours, Duchess. You are not yet qualified to assess the emotional landscape. Sable set her own fork down, mirroring his gesture. I have been here less than 4 hours, and I have already learned that you prepared my rooms yourself, that you selected the books for my shelves, that entering your mother's wing for the first time in 2 years was something you chose to do for a stranger you expected to ignore you. Those do not strike me as the actions of a man who is merely occupying a title. The silence that followed was different from the silences that had come before. Less defensive, more startled, as if she had reached across the table and touched something he had believed was well hidden. "You are observant," he said. Something happened then that she was not prepared for. Cassius laughed. It was brief and rough, and clearly involuntary, as if the sound had escaped before he could stop it. He looked almost as surprised by it as she was. "You are nothing like the woman in that portrait," he said. "I know. She was Odette's idea of what a duke would want, all pale skin and demure expression and lowered eyes." "And what do you think a duke wants?" Sable met his gaze across the shortened distance between them. "I think this particular duke does not know what he wants because he stopped allowing himself to want anything a long time ago." The laughter was gone now, replaced by something rawer. He held her gaze for a beat longer than was comfortable, then stood abruptly. "Breakfast is at 8, he said. "I take it in here. You are welcome to join me or not, as you prefer." His hand hesitated on the back of his chair. "The book's in your room. There is a volume of Lucretius on the second shelf. It was my brother's favorite." I thought perhaps, he stopped himself, the sentence dying unfinished. "Good night, Duchess." He left the dining room with the slightly too quick stride of a man, retreating from a conversation that had gotten closer than he intended. Sable pushed back from the table and went upstairs to her rooms. She found the Lucretius exactly where he had said it would be. A slim volume bound in dark blue leather, its pages soft with handling. On the inside cover, in a young man's careless hand, someone had written, "Nothing is ever destroyed. It only changes form." Held a dead boy's book to her chest and made a second promise. She would find out what had happened to Theron Blackthorne. She would find out what had driven this family apart, what had sent Cassius into exile, what wound was so deep that an entire household had chosen silence over healing. And then, God help her, she would try to fix it. Morning arrived not with sunlight, but with the particular gray luminance of northern England, where dawn was less an event than a slow concession. Sable woke to the sound of rain against the windows and the smell of coal smoke drifting from a fireplace someone had tended while she slept. She dressed in one of the 2 plain dresses she had brought from home, a brown wool so modest it practically apologized for existing. Her own clothes, her own name inside the collar, her own worn boots that knew the shape of her feet. There was comfort in wearing something that actually belonged to her after a day of borrowed everything. Breakfast was already laid in the small dining room when she arrived. Cassius sat in his usual place, ledger open, pen in hand, a cup of tea growing cold beside him. He glanced up when she entered, and she caught the fractional pause, his eyes registering the change from yesterday's wedding silk to today's brown wool. If the contrast disappointed him, he did not show it. "Good morning," Sable said, taking the seat she had claimed last night, directly across from him. "Good morning, Duchess." "Sable. If we are going to live in the same house, you might as well use my actual name." He considered this as if she had proposed something radical. Sable, then. They ate in something approaching companionable silence. The food was good, eggs and toast, and preserves that tasted of someone's careful labor. Sable found herself wondering about the kitchen, about who cooked for a household this diminished, about how many hands kept this vast, crumbling estate running. "How many staff remain?" she asked. Cassius did not look up from his ledger. Mrs. Garrick, the cook, Mrs. Pell, 2 housemaids, Nell and her younger sister Bryn, a footman, Halcott, the groundskeeper, Old Wren. He turned a page. 7 people maintaining a house built for 40. The number landed with a thud. 7 people for a house built for 40. And the closed wing? His pen stopped moving. That wing is not in use. I can see that. I am asking why. It was not a practical decision. Sable kept her voice even. It was an amputation. You closed it because something in it was unbearable. Cassius set his pen down. The west wing contained my brother's rooms, his study, his music room, his collection of natural specimens. When he died, I sealed the wing. I do not enter it. No one does. That is not grief, she said quietly. That is a shrine. He left. She heard his boots retreating, then the distant sound of a door closing with more force than was necessary. She found Mrs. Garrick in the kitchens. "I would like to see the house," Sable said. "All of it." What followed was a 3-hour tour that broke her heart in stages. The main gallery held paintings worthy of a museum, water-stained from leaks no one repaired. The library was enormous but drafty, books spotting with damp. The music room contained a pianoforte under dust cloths. "When did it begin?" Sable asked. "The decline." After Master Theron's death, His Grace dismissed the steward and most of the household. He said he did not need the expense. But it was not about money, Your Grace. The estate generates adequate income. It was about emptying the house, making it match how he felt inside. The observation was so precise, so achingly perceptive, that Sable had to look away. "Tell me about Theron," she said. Mrs. Garrick's reserve cracked for the first time. Just a hairline fracture, a brightness in her eyes, a slight unsteadiness in her voice. But it was enough. "Master Theron was sunlight," she said. "Where His Grace was always serious, always careful, always watching before he acted, Master Theron was warmth and noise and motion. He played the pianoforte terribly and loudly. He collected butterflies and pressed flowers, and could name every bird in the county by its call. He was 4 years younger than His Grace, and he worshipped his brother absolutely. And his death?" Mrs. Garrick's expression closed like a door. "An accident. 3 years ago this autumn. That is all I can say, Your Grace. The rest is His Grace's story to tell, when and if he chooses. It was a boundary, firmly drawn. Sable respected it, but filed away the word accident, and the careful way Mrs. Garrick had separated it from the rest of the story, as if the word itself was insufficient or inaccurate, and she knew it. They had reached a corridor that ended in a set of double doors, heavy oak reinforced with iron brackets. A key hung from a hook beside them, visible but untouched, its surface dulled with tarnish. The west wing, Mrs. Garrick said unnecessarily. Sable did not try the doors. Not today. Instead, she turned back toward the main house, her mind already working. 7 staff for a house this size, an estate generating income that was not being reinvested, a duke drowning in ledger work because he refused to hire help, a sealed wing holding the ghost of a brother whose death had hollowed out everything it touched. "Mrs. Garrick," she said, "I need to see the estate accounts." The housekeeper blinked. "Your Grace?" "The accounts. Income, expenditure, outstanding repairs, staff wages, tenant records, everything. If I am the Duchess of Ashworth, then this estate is my responsibility as much as his. And from what I have seen this morning, it needs considerably more attention than one man with a ledger and a death wish for sleep can provide." Mrs. Garrick stared at her for a long moment. Then something happened that Sable suspected was rare. The older woman smiled. "I will have the records brought to your sitting room this afternoon, Your Grace. All of them." Sable spent the rest of the day buried in numbers. What she found was not financial ruin, but financial paralysis. The estate was solvent, but nothing was being maintained. Cassius was meticulous in documentation, catastrophic in care. When he appeared in her sitting room doorway at dusk, she was ready. "Your north pasture fence has been broken for 14 months. 3 tenant cottages need roof repairs before winter. The east chimney in the main house is cracked and will become a fire hazard within the year. The library has a damp problem that is destroying irreplaceable books, and you have not purchased new bed linens for the servants' quarters in over 2 years, which is not neglect. It is cruelty." He flinched. "I have been managing alone," he said quietly. "You have been hiding alone. There is a difference." Then he did something she did not expect. He sat down and pulled one of her repair lists toward him. "Show me what else you have found." They worked together until the fire burned low. When Cassius stood to leave, he paused at the door. "The west wing," he said. His voice was very low. "Theron's rooms. I am not ready for that." "I know," Sable said. "I will not ask you to be. The house first." The man would take longer. The letter arrived on the 3rd morning, delivered by a rider who looked as though he had been traveling through the night. Mrs. Garrick brought it to the breakfast table on a silver tray, her expression carefully blank, in a way that immediately set Sable's nerves on edge. Cassius took the letter, examined the seal, and went very still. "What is it?" Sable asked. "My mother." She watched the color leave his face in stages, like tide retreating from sand. He broke the seal and read in silence, his expression hardening with each line until his features might have been carved from the same dark stone as Ashworth Hall. "She is coming," he said flatly. "Tomorrow. She has heard about the wedding." Sable set down her toast. "Your mother. The one who has not spoken to you since your brother's funeral. The same. And she is coming here. To this house she abandoned. To see the wife you married to satisfy a legal requirement." Cassius folded the letter with surgical precision. "She is coming to assess the situation, to determine whether the marriage serves the family's interests or whether it constitutes yet another of my failures." The word failures carried the weight of years behind it. Sable heard in it a history of judgment, of expectation never met, of a son measured constantly against a standard he could never reach because the standard had died and become untouchable. What does she know about me? Nothing beyond what the solicitors reported. that her husband's chosen bride arrived, and the contract was fulfilled. She does not know about Odette. She does not know that you are the stepsister rather than the intended match. The implications settled over the breakfast table like frost. If Cassius's mother arrived expecting the tall, blonde, carefully bred Odette Varenne, and found instead a dark-haired merchant stepdaughter in a brown wool dress, the deception would be exposed in an instant, and with it, potentially, the entire legal foundation of the marriage. "We need to tell her the truth," Sable said. No. The refusal was immediate and absolute. Cassius's eyes met hers with an intensity that pinned her to her chair. "If my mother discovers the substitution, she will use it. She will petition to have the marriage annulled on grounds of fraud. She has wanted this estate in the hands of my cousin Aldrich since the day Theron died, and an annulment would give her the lever she needs. Why would your own mother want the estate taken from you? Because she blames me for Theron's death." The words fell into the room like stones into still water. Sable felt the ripples spread through her, disturbing everything she thought she understood about this family. Cassius stood, moving to the window with the restless energy of a man who needed distance from what he had just said. "She believes I was responsible. That my negligence, my failure to act," she stopped herself. Years of silence between them. A mother refusing to speak to her surviving son. Not because of indifference, but because of blame. "Were you responsible?" Sable asked. The question came out steady, clear, without judgment. She needed to know. Not to condemn or absolve, but to understand. Cassius was quiet for so long she thought he would not answer. When he spoke, his voice was stripped of every defense. "He died on my watch. I was meant to keep him safe. I failed." Whether that constitutes responsibility depends on how generously you interpret the word. It wasn't an admission of guilt. It was something more complex. The confession of a man who had taken responsibility for an outcome he may not have caused, but could not prove he had prevented. The worst kind of burden, unresolved, unforgivable, unanswerable. Sable rose from her chair. She crossed the room and stood beside him at the window, close enough to feel the tension radiating from his body but not touching him. Outside, old Wren was pruning the last of the garden roses, his movement slow and methodical against the gray morning. "Then we prepare," she said. "We prepare the house, we prepare a story, and we present your mother with a Duchess she cannot dismiss. She will tear you apart," he said. "She is not cruel in the way of society gossips. She is precise. She will find every weakness, every inconsistency, every gap in your knowledge of the family, the estate, the peerage, and she will use them. Then we close the gaps. You have today and tonight to teach me everything I need to know. Family history, estate details, social connections, your mother's expectations. If I am going to be examined, I intend to pass." "Why?" he asked. "Why would you do this? You could let her come. Let the truth emerge. Let the marriage dissolve. Your father's pension is already secured for the first year, regardless of annulment. You would be free." "I did not come here to be free, Cassius. I came here because there was no other choice. But I am choosing to stay because I am beginning to think this house needs me. And I am beginning to think that you need me too." He did not respond to the declaration. Instead, he turned back to the room with new energy. "We start with the family. Sit down. This will take time." They worked through the day and into the evening. Cassius was methodical in his instruction, mapping the Blackthorn family across generations. His father, the late Duke. His mother, Lady Adara, daughter of an earl. His brother, Theron, 4 years younger. The family's golden child, brilliant, warm, adored by everyone who met him. And Cassius himself, the elder son, the heir, The responsible one. Steady, capable, invisible. The son who managed while Theron charmed. The son who planned while Theron dreamed. The son who remained while Theron was mourned. Late that evening, he said something that made the air in the room shift. Theron would have liked you. Lady Adara Blackthorne arrived at Ashworth Hall at 20 minutes past noon in a carriage that gleamed like a rebuke. The grounds are worse than I feared. When did you dismiss the undergardeners? And the south facade, the ivy alone, will cost a fortune to remove if you wait much longer. The clipped authority in that voice made Sable's stomach tighten. She descended the final flight of stairs and stepped into the entrance hall. Lady Adara Blackthorne was tall, sharp-featured, silver-haired, immaculate in charcoal gray. Her eyes were Cassius's eyes, that same shifting gray, but without the guarded warmth Sable had begun to detect in her husband's gaze. In Lady Adara, the gray was pure assessment. Those eyes landed on Sable and conducted a complete inventory in 3 seconds. Hair, face, dress, posture, the absent jewels, the too loose wedding ring. Every detail found insufficient. So, Lady Adara said, "This is the bride. You are younger than the portrait suggested. Shorter. Darker. The portrait was not a good likeness, it seems. Portraits rarely capture the full measure of their subjects, your ladyship." Tea was served in the morning room. "Tell me about your family." Sable had prepared for this. "My father is a merchant. He has been unwell. My mother manages the household. Have been here 3 days, and you presume to instruct my son on the management of an estate that has been in this family for 9 generations. I presume nothing, I observe. The north pasture fence is broken. 3 tenant roofs need repair. The library has a damp problem that is destroying your late husband's book collection. These are not opinions. They are facts." Lady Adara leaned forward. "You speak of facts. Here is one. My late husband chose Odette Varenne for this match after careful consideration. He reviewed her lineage, her accomplishments, her suitability. She was selected because she met every criterion required of a Blackthorne bride. You," she let her gaze travel once more over Sable's plain dress, her work-roughened hands, her unadorned ears, "are not what he selected. The blow was precise and devastating, not because it was cruel, but because it was accurate. Sable wasn't what the late Duke had selected. She was not what anyone had selected. She was a substitute, a replacement, a stand-in, who had answered to the wrong name at an altar, and was now sitting in a morning room trying to convince a woman of impeccable breeding that common hands and an honest tongue were somehow equivalent to the pedigree she lacked. "You are right," Sable said. Lady Adara blinked. It was the first genuinely surprised expression Sable had seen on her face. "I am not what your husband selected," Sable continued. "I am not tall, or fair, or gently bred. I do not know the names of every lord in the county, or the correct form of address for a bishop's wife. I cannot play the pianoforte, or paint watercolors, or embroider anything more ambitious than a handkerchief. By every measure your world uses to judge worth, I am entirely deficient." She paused, letting the words settle. "But I am here. I am here in a house that has been dying by degrees. I am here because no one else was willing to be. And in 3 days, I have identified more urgent repairs than your son has addressed since Theron's death. Not because he is incapable, but because he has been too consumed by grief to see what is crumbling around him. I may not be what was selected, your ladyship, but I am what arrived, and I intend to be enough." Silence filled the room like water filling a vessel, pressing against every surface, finding every crack. Lady Adara's expression underwent a transformation so subtle that anyone less attentive than Sable might have missed it. The judgment did not disappear. The assessment didn't soften. but something beneath both shifted. The way bedrock shifts beneath soil, invisible but fundamental. "You have nerve," Lady Adara said. "I will grant you that. I have necessity. Nerve is what people with options call it. When you have no options, it is simply survival." The older woman stood. She moved to the window, her back to Sable, her posture a rigid line of black against the gray light. When she spoke again, her voice had changed, not warmer, but deeper, as if she were drawing words from a place she did not visit often. "My husband chose this match because the Varenne family held a piece of land adjacent to the Ashworth northern boundary, a strategic acquisition. The bride was incidental to the acreage." She turned. He was a practical man. Love was not a language he spoke or valued. I accepted that. My sons did not. She paused, and in that pause, Sable heard the vast, complicated geography of a family built on duty rather than affection. Theron especially, Lady Adara continued. He believed in things his father considered foolish. Kindness as policy. Generosity as strategy. The radical notion that people mattered more than property. Her voice caught on the last word, the tiniest fracture in her armor. He was wrong, of course. Sentiment does not maintain estates or protect legacies. But he believed it with such conviction that sometimes, just for a moment, he made you believe it too. She fell silent. The room held its breath. "I will stay for 1 week," Lady Adara announced, her iron restored as quickly as it had cracked. "I will observe. I will assess. At the end of that week, I will make my determination about whether this marriage serves the family's interests. And if you determine it does not, then we will have a different conversation. One you will not enjoy." She swept from the room, calling for Mrs. Garrick to prepare her usual chambers, and Sable was left standing in a morning room that smelled of roses and felt like a battlefield after the first volley. Cassius entered fully, no longer hiding in the doorway. He crossed to where she stood and stopped close enough that she could feel the heat of him. "You did not flinch," he said. There was something in his voice she had not heard before. Not admiration, exactly. Something more stunned than that, as if he had braced himself to watch her crumble and instead witnessed her stand. "I told you," Sable said, her voice not entirely steady. "I cannot afford to." His hand lifted, hesitated, then settled briefly on her shoulder. The touch lasted barely a second, but she felt it through the wool like a brand. "Thank you," he said. Then he was gone, following his mother's path through the house, and Sable sank into the nearest chair because her knees had finally decided to acknowledge what the rest of her had been too stubborn to feel. She was shaking, her hands, her legs, the muscles along her jaw, the entire body trembling with the delayed recognition of what she had just done. She had stood before a woman who could dismantle her borrowed life with a single letter to a solicitor, and she had refused to break. 1 week. She had 1 week to prove herself to a woman who measured worth in bloodlines and acreage. Sable looked down at the too loose ring on her finger, the plain gold band that belonged to a name that was not hers, in a house that was not hers, in a life she had stumbled into because her stepsister had been too proud to keep a promise. 1 week. She could do anything for 1 week. She hoped. The week that followed was the most exhausting of Sable's life. She met with old Wren about the grounds. She reorganized the household menus with Mrs. Pell. She spent an afternoon with Nell and Bryn, learning which rooms leaked, which chimneys smoked, which floorboards were dangerous. She presented the full report to Cassius in the library. "You did all of this in 4 days. Your staff did most of it. I simply asked the right questions. No one has asked them anything since Theron died." He paused. "I should have. I know that. I just could not seem to. Every conversation, every decision, and every interaction required energy I did not have. It was easier to manage the accounts alone. Numbers do not require you to be present. They do not look at you with worry or pity or expectation. And people do. People are exhausting. Sable almost smiled. Yes, they are. But they are also the point, Cassius. The estate is not the ledgers. It is the people who live and work here. They have been waiting for someone to notice them. He was quiet for a long time, staring at the report. When he spoke, his voice was lower than usual. Theron understood that instinctively. People were his native language. He could walk into a tenant's cottage and within 10 minutes know every member of the family by name, their concerns, their hopes. I watched him do it 100 times and never understood how. "Will you teach me?" he asked. The vulnerability in the question was staggering. A duke asking a merchant stepdaughter to teach him how to be human. Not how to manage or govern or command, but how to connect. How to be present in the way his dead brother had been naturally, and he had never learned. "Yes," she said, "if you will let me." Sable was in the library cataloging the damaged books when she heard the pianoforte. The sound was so unexpected that she stopped breathing. Music had not filled Ashworth Hall since Theron died, and the notes drifting from the music room were hesitant, clumsy, picking out a melody she did not recognize, but that carried the particular ache of something remembered rather than read from a score. He played for perhaps 5 minutes, the music faltering and restarting, growing slightly more confident with each attempt. Then he stopped abruptly, his hands flat on the keys, his head bowed. He was crying. "The music room," Sable said gently. "It has good acoustics." He looked at her sharply, searching for evidence that she had witnessed his private collapse. She kept her expression open, neutral, offering him the gift of pretending she had not heard. "It does," he said finally. Theron chose this house for the music room, actually. He visited with Father when he was 12 and declared he would live here someday because the way sound moved through that room was, his voice caught, was like being inside a bell. "Inside a bell," Sable repeated softly. "That is beautiful." He was beautiful. Cassius's voice dropped to barely a whisper. "In every way that I am not. Bright where I am dark. Open where I am closed. He made people love him simply by existing near them, and I could not keep him safe." The sentence landed in the space between them with the weight of years of unspoken grief. "What happened?" Sable asked. Not demanding, not pressing, just opening a door he could walk through, or not. Cassius stared at his plate for so long she thought he would refuse. Then he began to speak. "We were riding. The North Ridge, above the quarry. A route we had taken 100 times. Theron's horse spooked at something. A bird. A shadow. No one ever determined what. He was thrown. The fall itself might not have been fatal, but the quarry edge gave way beneath him. He fell 40 feet onto the rocks below. I was 20 yards behind him," Cassius continued, his voice mechanical now, reciting facts to keep the emotion at bay. "I saw the horse rear. I saw him fall. I reached the edge and I could see him below. He was still alive, still conscious. He looked up at me and he said my name, just my name. And then the second section of the edge collapsed and buried him before I could climb down." His hand turned beneath hers, gripping her fingers with a strength that bordered on pain. They told me afterwards that he died instantly from the second collapse, that he did not suffer. But I heard him say my name, Sable. He called for me, and I could not reach him. She tightened her grip on his hand and said nothing because there were no words adequate for this. No platitude, no reassurance, no gentle lie that could undo the image of a man watching his brother die 20 yards away, while the ground itself conspired to keep them apart. "Your mother blames you," she said at last. "My mother blames me because I was the elder. I was responsible. I should have checked the path. I should have noticed the unstable ground. I should have been closer, faster, better. And you blame yourself. I blame myself because she is right. I was responsible. I was meant to protect him, and I failed. Sable lifted his hand and pressed it between both of hers. You were 20 yards away when a horse spooked at something no one could have predicted, and the ground collapsed beneath your brother. That is not failure. That is tragedy. There is a difference. He looked at her, with eyes so raw she could see straight through every defense he had ever built. Do you truly believe that? I truly believe that you have punished yourself for the crime of being mortal, of not being able to control the earth beneath your brother's feet. And I believe Theron, who loved you, who worshipped you, would be heartbroken to see what you have done to yourself and this house in his name. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of grief finally spoken aloud, of a wound exposed to air for the first time, of the terrifying, exhilarating vulnerability of being truly seen by another person. Cassius withdrew his hand gently, not a rejection, a necessity. He needed to reassemble himself, to find the edges of his composure and pull them back into place. She understood that. Some kinds of openness could only be sustained for moments before they became unbearable. "Good night, Sable," he said. His voice was rough, but steady. "Good night, Cassius." He left. She sat in the empty dining room and let the magnitude of what he had shared settle into her bones. The brother, the quarry, the name called out from 40 feet below, the silence that followed, the sealed wing, the empty house, the ledgers used as armor against feeling. She understood now. All of it. The forgotten Duke was not forgotten by the world. He had forgotten himself, had buried himself alongside his brother in that quarry, and spent years pretending the walking, breathing, ledger-keeping version of himself was sufficient. It wasn't sufficient. And now, impossibly, improbably, he was beginning to realize it. Because of her. The wrong bride. The substitute. The woman no one selected. She pressed her hands flat against the table, feeling the solid wood beneath her palms, and made herself breathe. On the 6th day, everything broke. It began with Cousin Aldrich. Aldrich Blackthorn was everything Cassius was not. Fair-haired, easy-mannered, quick to laugh. He swept into Ashworth Hall with the confidence of someone who had mentally redecorated every room. "Your Grace," he said, bowing with exaggerated courtesy. What an extraordinary transformation. Sable felt the trap in his phrasing. He was not talking about her becoming a duchess. He was talking about the difference between her and Odette. He knew. "I have had an interesting correspondence with a gentleman in Edinburgh," Aldrich continued, "a viscount who has recently acquired a charming companion, a tall, fair-haired woman named Odette Varenne." He paused to let the name detonate. "Curious, is it not, that the bride contracted to marry my cousin should be residing 400 miles north of the altar?" The room went cold. Sable could hear her own heartbeat, could feel the careful architecture of lies she had been maintaining begin to crack along every load-bearing joint. Aldrich leaned forward, his smile widening. "Now, shall we discuss what this means for the validity of this marriage? Because I have taken the liberty of consulting a solicitor, and the word fraud has arisen with rather distressing frequency." Cassius moved so quickly Sable barely tracked it. One moment he was standing behind the desk. The next, he was in front of Aldrich, his hand gripping the arm of the chair, his face inches from his cousin's. "You will leave this house," Cassius said, his voice a register she had never heard from him before. Low and lethal and absolutely certain. "Now." Or what? Aldrich's composure held, but his eyes betrayed him, a flicker of genuine fear beneath the bravado. "You will strike me?" That will certainly strengthen the fraud case. There is no fraud case. Lady Adara's voice cut through the room like a surgeon's blade. She stood in the doorway, ramrod straight, her expression so cold it lowered the temperature. Aldrich scrambled to his feet. Aunt Adara, you were merely attempting to destabilize a legal marriage for your own financial benefit, using information obtained through gossip and speculation. She entered the room with the measured pace of an executioner approaching the block. I have reviewed the marriage contract. It specifies a union between the Duke of Ashworth and a daughter of the Varenne household. It does not specify which daughter. The contract is valid. The marriage is legal. Your solicitor, if he is competent, will confirm this. Sable stopped breathing. Lady Adara knew. She had known, perhaps from the beginning, perhaps from the moment she saw Sable's dark hair and brown eyes, and understood that the portrait on her mantelpiece did not match the woman in front of her. She had known, and she had said nothing. Had spent a week observing, assessing, building her own case before anyone else could build theirs. A daughter of the Varenne household, Aldrich repeated, his composure cracking. That is a generous interpretation. It is the correct interpretation. And if you challenge it, you will find the full weight of the Blackthorn name and legal resources arrayed against you. Lady Adara's voice dropped to a temperature that could have frozen the Thames. I suggest you return to whatever gambling establishment currently holds your debts and inform them that Ashworth Hall remains firmly in my son's possession. Are we clear? Aldrich looked between them, his handsome face calculating furiously. Then his smile returned, thinner now, with visible teeth. Crystal clear, Aunt Adara. My apologies for the intrusion. He bowed and left, and the sound of his curricle on the gravel drive was the most beautiful thing Sable had ever heard. The silence that followed his departure was vast. Lady Adara turned to Sable. Her expression was unreadable, but something behind it was working, grinding through conclusions like machinery. A daughter of the Varenne household, she repeated. You are fortunate the late Duke's solicitor was imprecise in his language. She paused. Or perhaps fortune has nothing to do with it. She left without another word. Cassius sank into a chair, his head in his hands. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Sable crossed the room and knelt beside him. She protected us, Sable said. She protected the estate. He raised his head. There is a difference, is there? Because from where I was standing, it looked very much like a mother defending her son. Cassius stared at her, and she watched the idea work through him, watched it encounter the certainty he had built around his mother's rejection, and begin, slowly, to dissolve the edges. Before either of them could speak again, Lady Adara's voice carried down the corridor from wherever she had retreated to. Dinner will be at 7. All three of us. We have a great deal to discuss. It was not an invitation. It was a command. And for the first time, Sable was grateful for Lady Adara's iron will, because it meant that tonight, around a table, in the warm light of a dining room she had scrubbed and restored with her own hands, this fractured family would sit together and begin, however painfully, to talk. Dinner that evening was unlike any meal Sable had shared at Ashworth Hall. Lady Adara sat at the head of the table, a position no one challenged. Cassius sat to her right, Sable to her left. I have spent 6 days in this house, she said. I have watched you manage the staff with competence and compassion. I have seen the repair schedules you have drafted, the accounts you have organized, the grounds you have begun to restore. She looked directly at Sable. I have also watched my son play the pianoforte for the first time in 3 years. Cassius went very still. Do not look so startled, Lady Adara said. I may be old, but I am not deaf. You played Theron's sonata, the one he composed for my birthday. She paused, and for a moment, just a moment, the Iron Woman wavered. I had not heard it since he played it himself. I blamed you, Lady Adara said to Cassius. I blamed you because blaming you was easier than accepting that the world is arbitrary and cruel, and that my youngest son died because a horse was frightened and the ground was weak. Blame requires a target. Grief does not. Mother, Cassius's voice fractured on the word. I was wrong. Lady Adara's composure held, but barely. Her hands were clasped so tightly the knuckles had gone white. The accident was not your fault. I have known that from the beginning. I told myself otherwise, because the alternative, that Theron died for no reason, that there was nothing anyone could have done, that the world simply took him, was intolerable. Sable watched Cassius receive these words, watched years of carried guilt meet years of manufactured blame, and begin to unravel. His face went through a series of transformations so rapid she could barely track them. Shock, rage, relief, devastation, each one surfacing and submerging like waves in a storm. Sable reached beneath the table and found Cassius's hand. He gripped her fingers with the desperate strength of a man being pulled from drowning. She held on and did not let go. Lady Adara watched their joined hands with an expression Sable could not fully decode. Something between recognition and regret. This girl, she said, and for the first time, the word carried no contempt. This girl you married. She has done more for this house and for you in 1 week than I managed in the year before I left. She paused. She is not what I would have chosen. But I am beginning to think that what I would have chosen is not what you needed. Cassius's grip on Sable's hand tightened further. I will return to London tomorrow, Lady Adara continued. I will inform the family that the marriage is sound and that the Duchess of Ashworth has my endorsement. She stood, and for a moment, her hand hovered near her son's shoulder, not quite touching. Not quite brave enough. I am sorry, Cassius, for all of it. She left the dining room. Steady and measured, but Sable heard the barely perceptible hitch in her stride, the single stumble of a woman whose composure had finally cost more than she could afford to pay. Cassius sat motionless, still gripping Sable's hand. His eyes were closed. His breathing was ragged. She did not try to make him speak. She did not offer comfort or analysis or perspective. She simply held his hand in the quiet dining room while the candles burned lower and the food grew cold, and the man beside her slowly, painfully, began to let go of something he had been holding since the quarry. When he finally spoke, his voice was wrecked. She knew. She always knew it was not my fault. Yes, and she let me carry it anyway. Yes, because her grief needed somewhere to go, and you were the only one left to receive it. He opened his eyes and looked at her, really looked, with every defense stripped and every wall dismantled. The man beneath the Duke, the brother beneath the title. Raw and wounded and present in a way she had never seen. Why are you still here? He asked. Not why did you come? Not why did you stay? Why are you here in this moment holding my hand after everything you have heard? Because someone should have been holding it long ago, and because she hesitated, then pushed through. Because I did not choose this marriage, and you did not choose me, but I am choosing this. Right now, whatever this is, I am choosing it. He lifted their joined hands and pressed his lips to her knuckles. The gesture was slow and deliberate, and carried none of the performative distance of his earlier courtesies. It was the most honest thing she had felt from him. I do not deserve you, he said against her skin. That is not for you to decide. He almost smiled. There it was again. That fractional loosening, that ghost of warmth. Small, but real. The first green shoot through cracked ground. Come with me, he said. There is something I need to do, and I don't think I can do it alone. She knew before he said it. She knew from the direction he walked, from the corridor he chose, from the way his pace slowed as they approached the heavy oak doors with their iron brackets and the tarnished key hanging on its hook. The West Wing. He took the key. His hands shook so badly the metal rattled against the lock plate. Sable put her hand over his, steadying him, and together they turned the key. The doors opened onto darkness and the particular smell of sealed time, dust, still air, the faint ghost of pressed flowers and old paper, and a young man's life preserved in amber. Cassius stood on the threshold, unable to move. Sable lifted a candle from a wall sconce and stepped through first. Not because she was braver, but because sometimes the only way to help someone cross a threshold is to show them the other side is survivable. Picked up one of the butterfly sketches, a delicate pencil drawing of a red admiral, and held it in both hands like a prayer. He was so talented, Cassius said, at everything. Music, art, natural science. Everything came easily to him. I used to be jealous when we were young, before I understood that what I envied was not his talent, but his joy. Set the butterfly sketch down carefully, precisely, as if it were the most important document he had ever handled. Then he turned to her, and in the candlelight, with dust motes swirling around them like the ghosts of pressed flowers, he touched her face. His fingers traced her jaw, her cheekbone, the line of her brow, learning her features the way he might learn a passage in a difficult book, carefully, thoroughly, with the focused attention of someone who intended to remember every detail. I was supposed to marry a stranger, he said, a name on a contract, a portrait on a mantelpiece. Instead, I married you, and you have dismantled every defense I had. Is that a complaint? It is a confession. He kissed her. Not the ghost kiss through the veil at the altar. Not a kiss of performance or obligation. A real kiss, warm and searching and slightly desperate, tasting of tears and wine, and the terrifying freedom of finally choosing to feel something after years of choosing not to. They left the West Wing together, and behind them, the doors stood open for the first time in 3 years, letting the draft from the main house move through the still rooms, stirring the dust on butterfly sketches and sheet music and the collected evidence of a life that had been too bright and too brief and too loved to remain sealed away forever. Lady Adara departed the next morning with considerably less ceremony than she had arrived. She kissed her son on the cheek, an act that made Mrs. Garrick quietly weep into her apron, and she nodded to Sable with an expression that was not warmth, but was perhaps its distant aristocratic cousin. Take care of him, she said, and take care of this house. It has been neglected long enough. Then she was gone, and Ashworth Hall settled into a new kind of quiet. Not the suffocating silence of before, but something gentler. The quiet of a house beginning to heal. 3 days passed in a rhythm that felt almost domestic. Cassius joined Sable for every meal now. No ledgers at the table, and no pretense of distance. They talked about the estate, about the repairs underway, about old Wren's plans for the garden, about Mrs. Pell's triumphant experiment with a new recipe that used herbs from the kitchen beds Sable had helped restore. They talked about smaller things, too. Books they had read, places they would like to see. The particular quality of light over the moors in the early morning. Conversations that had no strategic purpose, that existed simply because two people had discovered they enjoyed being in each other's company. Cassius began sleeping in his bedchamber again. Mrs. Garrick reported this to Sable with the carefully neutral expression of someone trying very hard not to cry. And every evening, after dinner, they sat together in the library, sometimes reading, sometimes talking, sometimes simply existing in the same space. Two people learning that presence did not require performance. On the 4th day after Lady Adara's departure, the letter arrived. It was addressed to Sable in handwriting she recognized instantly. Odette's elegant, practiced script, Every letter formed with the precision of someone who had been taught that penmanship was a reflection of character. Sable opened it at the breakfast table, while Cassius read the Morning Post across from her. She had not expected to hear from her stepsister. She had, in truth, tried not to think about Odette at all, because thinking about Odette meant thinking about the lie, and the lie had become increasingly difficult to hold as everything around it grew more real. "Dear sister," the letter began, "I hope this finds you well, though I confess I write with motives that are not entirely selfless. My situation in Edinburgh has changed. The Viscount, who was so charming in his pursuit, has proven rather less charming in his constancy. He has developed a sudden interest in a younger woman with a larger fortune, and I find myself in a position that is becoming financially precarious. I have heard through mutual acquaintance that the Duke of Ashworth has proven more amenable than anticipated, and that the household is being restored. I am glad, but I must be frank. I am considering returning to claim my rightful place as the contracted bride. The marriage certificate bears my name. Legally, I am the Duchess of Ashworth. Should I choose to present myself, the position would revert to me, and you would return to your previous situation. I do not wish to cause you distress, but I must think practically, as I have always done. I will wait 1 month before taking action. Consider this a courtesy. Your sister, Odette." Sable read the letter twice. Then she folded it carefully, set it on the table, and pressed her hands flat against the wood to stop them shaking. Cassius looked up. "What is it?" She could lie. She could hide the letter, burn it, pretend it never arrived. She could protect the fragile, beautiful thing growing between them by simply refusing to acknowledge the threat. But she had promised herself, on her first night in this house, that pretense was Odette's talent, not hers. She handed him the letter. She watched him read it, watched the color drain from his face, then return in a flush of anger she had never seen from him before, hot and immediate and directed. She would not dare, he said, the words bitten off like thread. She would. Sable's voice was steady, though her chest felt like it was being crushed. She is pragmatic above all else. If her situation in Edinburgh has truly collapsed, she will do whatever serves her interests, including claiming a marriage she never wanted. The contract specifies a daughter of the Varenne household. My mother's interpretation protects us. Your mother's interpretation was deployed against Cousin Aldrich to protect the estate. If Odette herself appears, claiming to be the intended bride, the legal question becomes considerably more complicated. Cassius stood, crossed to her side of the table, knelt beside her chair, the way she had knelt beside his after Lady Adara's confession. "Listen to me," he said. "I do not care what any contract says. I do not care what name is on the marriage certificate. I married you, not Odette. You, the woman who moved her place setting across the table because she refused to shout over soup. The woman who fixed my accounts and challenged my grief and held my hand while I opened a door I had sealed since Theron died. You." Sable's vision blurred with tears she refused to let fall. The contract does not know that. The law does not know that. Then we will make them know. How? I will write to the solicitors. I will file a declaration of identity confirming that I married Sable Varenne with full knowledge and consent, that the substitution was known to me and accepted, that the marriage is valid as between the two parties who actually stood at the altar. You would put that in writing, confirm the deception openly, risk the scandal. His hands found hers. I would risk considerably more than scandal for you. She looked at him through her tears and saw something she had not seen before. Not the controlled Duke, not the grieving brother, not the guarded, careful man who measured every word and every gesture. She saw someone who had decided, fully and without reservation, to choose. And then, because she was Sable and not Odette, because practicality was not the same as cowardice. She said, "Write the letter now, before we lose our nerve." He kissed her forehead, stood, and went to the study. Sable sat alone with Odette's letter and the remains of breakfast, and the quiet, persistent terror that the life she had accidentally built could still be taken from her by the woman who had thrown it away. The solicitor's response arrived 5 days later, and it was not what they had hoped. The legal situation, the letter explained in the merciless precision of professional language, was complex. The original contract specified Odette Varenne by name, while the Duke's declaration of knowing consent carried weight. A challenge from the named bride could not be dismissed without judicial review. A court might uphold the marriage, or it might not. The outcome was uncertain. Sable also wrote to her father, telling him everything. The substitution, the Duke who had known from the beginning. She asked for his blessing. His response came in shaky handwriting. "My dear girl, you walked into a stranger's life and made it livable again. If that is not worth blessing, I do not know what is. Be happy, Sable. You have earned it." Odette's response to the settlement offer was brief. "Accepted. The land and settlement will suffice. I withdraw any claim to the marriage. Do try to be happy. It would be tedious if all this drama were for nothing. Yours, Odette." Sable laughed. It was the most genuine expression of affection Odette had ever offered her, and it came in the form of a legal concession wrapped in sardonic detachment. Cassius found her laughing in the morning room, Odette's letter in one hand, tears on her face. "Good news or bad?" he asked from the doorway. She held up the letter. "It is over. She is accepted. The marriage stands." He crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled her into an embrace so complete it felt like being enclosed in something permanent. His arms around her, his face pressed against her hair, his breath warm against her temple. "It stands," he repeated, as if needing to say it aloud to believe it. "We stand." They held each other in the morning room, where Sable had once served tea to a woman who judged her unworthy, in a house she had entered as a fraud, and now inhabited as something far more honest than any titled bride could have been. When they finally pulled apart, Cassius reached into his waistcoat pocket and produced a ring. Not the plain gold band that slid loose on her finger. This ring was older, more delicate, a dark sapphire set in silver filigree that had been worn smooth by generations of handling. "It was my mother's," he said. "Before she married my father, she wore this. She left it behind when she departed Ashworth. Mrs. Garrick kept it safe." He took her left hand, removed the too large gold band, and slid the sapphire ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if her hand had been the one it was always waiting for. "Now it is yours," he said, "and this time, the ring fits." Sable looked down at the sapphire on her finger, at the hand of the man holding hers, at the morning light falling through clean windows onto polished floors in a house that was learning, slowly and stubbornly, how to live again. For the first time since she had put on her stepsister's wedding dress and walked 30 steps toward an altar where the wrong groom waited for the wrong bride, Sable Varenne felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. 6 months later, Ashworth Hall was unrecognizable. Not in its bones. The dark stone still absorbed light. The moors still rolled wild beyond the garden walls. But the decay was gone. The north pasture fence stood straight. The tenant roofs no longer leaked. The library books had been restored. The kitchen garden produced enough to supply the house and the tenant families. The grounds, under old Wren's restored authority, had begun the slow journey back toward beauty. The west wing was open. Theron's butterfly sketches hung framed in the main gallery now, alongside the ancestral portraits. The pianoforte in the music room was tuned and played regularly. Not well. Cassius would never have Theron's natural gift, but the sound of music in the house, however imperfect, was itself a form of healing. Sable stood in the library on a Tuesday afternoon, shelving a new delivery of books when she found it. It was tucked inside a volume of Lucretius, the same slim blue edition that had been Theron's favorite, the one inscribed with his careless wisdom about nothing ever being destroyed. A folded piece of paper wedged deep into the spine, invisible unless you opened the book fully and let the pages fall where they would. She unfolded it carefully. The handwriting was Theron's, the same young, confident script she had seen on butterfly labels and sheet music annotations. But this was different. This was a letter, addressed not to anyone in particular, but to whoever might find it, whenever they might find it, however long the book sat on the shelf before someone loved it enough to open it completely. To whoever reads this, if you are reading this, you have found my favorite book and opened it with the kind of attention that most people do not give to anything, which means you are probably someone worth talking to. I have a theory that the universe sends the right books to the right people at the right moments, and if that is true, then you have arrived at this page because you needed to. Here is what I know. My brother is the finest man alive, but he does not believe it. He has spent his whole life being steady and responsible and invisible, while I have been loud and messy and adored, and he thinks the difference is talent rather than temperament. He thinks I was given something he lacks. But what I was given is not a gift. It is a willingness to be foolish, to be wrong, to be open, to be hurt. Cassius has all of that inside him. He simply will not let it out because he is afraid that if he does, the world will not receive it as kindly as it receives mine. If you are in his life, and if you are reading this, you probably are. Please tell him this for me. The world does not need another careful man. It needs him. Messy and uncertain and brave. It needs him to stop hiding behind duty and start living behind purpose. And it needs him to know that he was always enough, not because of what he managed or controlled or endured, but because of who he is when he forgets to manage and control and endure. He is my brother. He is my best friend. And if I am not there to tell him this myself, I need someone else to. So here it is, written in the margins of a book about the nature of things, because Lucretius understood what I understand. Nothing is ever destroyed. It only changes form. Love changes form, but it doesn't end. Tell him, please. Theron Sable sat on the library floor with the letter in her hands and wept. Not with grief, though grief was part of it. Not with joy, though joy was there too. She wept with the overwhelming recognition of being seen by someone she had never met, spoken to across time by a young man who had loved his brother enough to leave a message in a bottle made of paper and book spines, trusting that someday someone would find it. She was still sitting there when Cassius found her, as he always found her, drawn to the library by the particular gravity that existed between them. "What happened?" he asked, kneeling beside her. She handed him the letter. She watched him read it, watched his face move through every stage of loss and recognition and love, watched him press the paper to his chest the way she had pressed the Lucretius to hers on her first night in this house. "He knew," Cassius whispered. "He knew I would need to hear this." "He knew you," Sable said. "He knew you would find someone eventually. And he wanted to make sure that when you did, you would let them in." Cassius pulled her close, there on the library floor, surrounded by books and dust motes and the lingering ghost of a brother who had been bright enough and wise enough and loving enough to write a letter to the future and trust it to the pages of a poem about the nature of the universe. "Am I enough?" he asked, his voice muffled against her hair. "Not the Duke, not the title. Just me." She thought of everything: the chapel and the wrong dress, the carriage and the lifted veil, the dining table and the moved place setting, the sealed wing and the tarnished key, the butterfly sketches and the pianoforte and the kiss among dust motes, the mother who blamed and then forgave, the cousin who threatened and was vanquished, the stepsister who abandoned and then released. Every broken thing that had led them here, to this floor, to this moment, to this improbable, accidental, absolutely inevitable love. "You were always enough," she said. "You just needed someone stubborn enough to prove it." He laughed. A real laugh, full and warm, the kind of sound that filled a room the way Theron's music once had. Different, but no less beautiful. His own. Outside the library windows, old Wren's gardens were coming into late bloom, stubborn roses and hardy chrysanthemums pushing color into the gray northern landscape, as if insisting that beauty was possible in unlikely soil. Mrs. Garrick moved through the corridors, with the quiet satisfaction of someone watching a house return to itself. Mrs. Pell sang in the kitchen. Nell and Bryn argued cheerfully about curtain fabric. Ashworth Hall was alive again. Not as it had been. Not as anyone had planned. But alive in the particular, imperfect, deeply human way that happens when someone walks into a broken place and refuses to leave until it remembers what it was meant to be. And in the library, the Duke of Ashworth held his accidental Duchess on the floor between the shelves and understood finally what his brother had always known. That love is not a weakness to be managed, or a risk to be calculated, or a duty to be performed. It is the only force stubborn enough to open sealed doors, restore crumbling walls, and convince a man who had forgotten how to live that the world still had use for him. Nothing is ever destroyed. It only changes form. Thank you for being here. You are the reason stories like this exist, because you believe that love does not always arrive the way we expect it to, that the right person is not always the chosen person, and that sometimes the most beautiful things in life begin with a mistake no one planned and no one would take back. Your presence in this space means the world. Consider subscribing if you want more stories with emotional depth, characters who earn their happiness, and endings that feel like coming home. Thank you for listening. You make this community what it is.